Please.
Yeah, well, in fact, let me give you a little bit of the timeline, because you're close, but a little far off. I was certainly involved at the time of the Tawana Brawley situation. She came out of Wappingers Falls, obviously hung around Poughkeepsie, but hung around downtown Newburgh, where she was scoring drugs, was staying out late, if you remember, past the curfew of her father, King, who had some anger management issues, the bus driver. He'd given her a whooping, and then all of a sudden she came up with this cockamamie story of why she was late. She had been kidnapped. Then we had Sharpton, Mason, and Maddox tell us that it was the assistant district attorney at that time who I knew. I knew him and his father. And I realized that was a lie. They destroyed that guy's life, and they continued to do so. But as a result of being up here, I had a chance to see the drug areas in Poughkeepsie, definitely in downtown Newburgh, that little crack zone right off of Broadway. And then eventually, a few years later, I was invited up to Poughkeepsie by citizens, both from the north side and the south side, who were upset with the direction that the city was going in terms of gangs, juvenile delinquency, and drug abuse. And I think it was on Vice Avenue that we met, right? Is that the location? Right. But I remember it was a neutral area, and on one side there were people from the south side. It was right before the July 4th holiday. And there were other people from the south side, and the south side and north side. They didn't want to come together. It was almost like there was a civil war. And as I said to them, you've got to come together because it's a mutual problem. Whatever happens in the south side is going to bleed over to the north side and vice versa, and then eventually to the surrounding suburbs. And we were able to put together a solid group that reflected the background of most of the city. Both young men, young women, older folks, teenagers, black, white, Hispanic. That's the kind of coalition you try to put together, especially when you're in an urban area like Poughkeepsie that has that kind of diversity. But I remember having to deal with that head on. And the people were saying, because they were so used to being divided, this will never work. I remember that day. This will never work. This will never work. I've heard that ad nauseum. You know, it's like everywhere I go, this will never work. That only works in New York. Well, it could work anywhere where people are able to put aside their differences. And that's why we were able to get the Poughkeepsie Guardian Angels. But my introduction into the area definitely was as a result of the Tawana Brawley situation, seeing the drug areas, and then obviously being asked years later to come to Poughkeepsie and organize that. Any other questions or statements? Yes, sir.
A couple of little issues. You mentioned that some of the fact that some of these drug areas have been so much trying to go ahead and control them. Has anyone really brought up an idea instead of going after the people and the dealers inside the house? How about going after the landlords or owners of the buildings instead? Now I know one of the things I'm seeing, and maybe this is coming up that I don't know about, is some sort of legislation that's saying that if you are an owner of a building and you are housing drug felons and drug accounts, your property can be seized and taken over, and everybody there can either be arrested or thrown out or so. Now, I'm not certain if anybody's brought that up, but from your experience, has anyone ever considered such an action plan like that?
Yeah, and in fact, there's a threefold situation that occurs whenever you're dealing with drug dealing. There's three types of drug dealing. Those that deal from within the privacy of their home or their apartment, or if they happen to be using somebody else's apartment, and it becomes almost like a Walmart in terms of selling drugs. There are those that will sell drugs on the property. It may not be inside, but they're on the porch, they're in the backyard, they're in the alleyway, or they're selling out of their car, they're just hanging out in a car, maybe on a corner. And then there's the old traditional way, they're just hanging out on the street. They may be outside of a convenience store, liquor store. They may be just on a residential area, and they're looking for customers. Now, in terms of the landlords, most of the landlords I've come across are absentee landlords. They live in Jupiter, Florida. They couldn't care jack diddly squat what goes on the property. They have a property manager who comes around to collect the rent. A lot of times that rent is paid through social services, so the check arrives, at the end of the month. So they're getting their money clean. They don't have to deal with whoever's dealing the drugs because the money is coming from the state or the county or whoever's paying the rent on behalf of the person receiving aid in terms of paying the rent. So they're happy. And it's very difficult at times to go to them. You'd have to be aware of what your local laws are in going after these kinds of deadbeat landlords, these absentee landlords. So that can be dealt with. It's difficult. The drug dealer themselves, there's a good chance they've been in and out of the system. They know how to play the system, the criminal justice system, and they got layers of defense. So they're even more difficult to deal with because they've already made a decision that they're going to go to jail, and they're going to keep going to jail, and they're going to train others, sycophants, toadies, and lackeys to assist them in this process. Now, the most vulnerable people who can be harassed and chased away are the customers. Just imagine, you got a bread store, you're baking bread. For whatever reason, I get into a beef with you. Maybe I'm a vendor. Maybe you're a union shop. Maybe I'm just a customer who just didn't like the fact that the bread you sold me wasn't sourdough bread, and I wanted Italian bread, and now I'm ready to go to war at you, and I set up a picket line outside of your store. You'd be surprised how many people, no matter how loyal as customers they've been to that mom and pop shop, will not cross the picket line. Not because this is against their belief system, but they don't want trouble. You see a picket, oh, I'm not going to cross that picket line. I don't want people seeing me. Who knows what the beef is here? So they avoid it. So if you have a visual patrol out on the streets, guess what? The customers are not stopping to buy drugs. I guarantee you that if I'm a dope fiend, or I need to make a score, I know 10 other spots I can go. I go to Beacon, I go to Newburgh, I go to Poughkeepsie, I go to Wappingers Falls. Trust me, I got a list of preferred locations, because remember, I have to. Because what happens if I come here to Highland Falls, and all of a sudden, the drug dealer or drug dealers I've been used to dealing with were caught up in a sweep. And now they're out of business for a few days before they get back into the streets, before they either bail themselves out or a judge releases them to go out and do it again. So I know I gotta feed my beast. So maybe my secondary choice is Beacon across the bridge. Or maybe it's Poughkeepsie on the other side. Or maybe it's Newburgh. And maybe I gotta go right into the belly of the beast, into Newburgh itself along Broadway. But I guarantee you, people who are hooked on drugs have options, but they're the easiest ones to intimidate. And that's why a visual presence of any type will chase them away. Now, if you're a drug dealer, and your customers aren't coming to you, then either you're going to your customers and doing home delivery, which most of them will not do, or you're going to realize this hole is dried up. It's like a reservoir that's dried up. So I got to pick up and move somewhere else. Now, you may say, well, wait a second, that's just moving the problem from one location to another. Hey, that's somebody else's problem. If you're able to get rid of your problem, you have shown that you're proactive. You're going to do something about it. If some other neighborhood refuses to deal with it, it's not that I want that problem to rest in their neighborhood, but I got to side with the people who are going to do something to eliminate that problem or lessen the problem. So the weak link in the chain is not the absentee landlords. We're used to getting fined, used to getting notices, as they wine dine and get pocket line down in Jupiter, Florida. It's not the drug dealers themselves. They're used to playing off the system and going in and out of the system. But it's the customers. It's the customers, especially when all of a sudden you're photographing the cars, you're taking their license plates. The guys and gals are going to have cardiac arrest. They're going to have an accident. What are you going to do with that information? Don't you worry about it. If you were smart, you wouldn't be coming into this neighborhood any longer to score your drugs. You think they're going to come back? No. It's the same way if an area has a lot of street prostitution or prostitution behind closed doors. It can't exist unless the Johns come to the house or the Johns come to pick up the girls, the transgenders, the men, whatever their predilection is. And if you start photographing and taking license plate numbers, you think that John is going to come back when he knows of so many other places he can feed his own predilection? Of course not. That's how you dry up a problem. Now, I speak with 38 years of experience, having done it in urban areas, suburban areas, and even rural areas. Customers are the weak link. They are the ones with the most at risk, and they don't want to deal with the criminal justice system. They don't want to have their car potentially seized in forfeiture. They don't want to have their bosses potentially knowing about what they're doing, like during their lunch hour, going to school for drugs. So there's a lot at risk. They don't want their wives to know, they don't want their families to know, they don't want their friends to know. So they are the ones most at risk. That's where I would put the pressure on.
I almost feel bad, like, because they're the victims.
Excuse me?
I would rather go after the dealers, though.
Well,
That's not-
the point is, you know, you can feel sorry for them. That's not going to do anything because they're going to continue to buy drugs in your neighborhood and they're going to continue to add to the problem. There are places they can go for help.
Well, yeah, I
Certainly
like
can
it
do
that-
referral.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you got to limit the fact that they're coming into your neighborhood. They're not doing it in their neighborhood. You should be offended at that. A lot of these people are coming from well-heeled areas where they don't have these problems. Leave it to Beaverland, Father Knows Best, Little House on the Prairie. They come into your neighborhood because nobody recognizes them. They won't do it in their neighborhood because then everybody will recognize them. So don't feel sorry for them. They're taking advantage of your neighborhood.
At that point, though, you would, you know, you can't have these lone soldiers though calling in. You know, we're from the same area at the same time. It's you know, there's retaliation when it comes to when you affect people's
It's a
bottom
small
line.
town.
It's a small town, and whatever small, you know, it can happen. You're throwing yourself out there. You need to all do it together.
Yeah,
Basically.
but
I mean,
that's why
it can't be just one person. You have to do it again.
The numbers, their strength, and if you're in an organization like the
Exactly.
Guardian Angels, there's a
Exactly.
lot of power and clout to that. So if you were to try to do it on your own, and I would never discourage anybody from trying to do it on their own, because that's one remedy. Sure, you put yourself at inordinate risk, but if you do it within the context of a trained organization like the Guardian Angels with a reputation like ours, far less likely that there's going to be any threat of a vendetta, a blood feud, retaliation, because then you're asking for a problem. Not like we're going to go and torch your car or drag you out of your house and give you a beat down. We don't do that. But we'll follow it through the criminal justice system. And obviously, we'll show up for hearings, we'll testify, we'll make sure we're there, we'll make sure they lock you up and throw you away for a while.
Unfortunately, the thing I think the best thing to combat this huge thing with drugs right now is knowledge. Obviously, to the younger kids and things like that, need to shut down, you know, any kind of praise of what the drug business does for the people that are involved in it and that kind of thing. Which brings me up to the next question: do you have any kind of monthly stop by, or do you swing by towns, prep talks to kids 15 to say 18 years old in certain towns like this? Like we have the center over here, which would be totally available, I'm sure, to any kind of you know, input that you and your organization
Specifically
would like to, you know, target in the area. Whether it's like as bad as it was said, where people would ask you what you want, I'm sure just your presence alone would actually be a deterrent in itself, not only from the buyers but the dealers itself. It's not that big of a town to where, you know, to where they can hide if it was sort of seen on a monthly basis. But do you have any kind of regular pattern that you stop by or organize with local town people?
We obviously offer our services to give presentations. We can only go where we're invited. Obviously can't go where you're not invited. But we've certainly been into our fair share of schools. We've been into drug rehab locations, talking to the people who are going through their therapy and trying to get back on track. We've spoken to law enforcement agencies, people involved in cracking down on the drugs. So we're available to all, and obviously we have individuals who are schooled in that local area who are guardian angels who can go in and be relative to what the problem is there. But again, we can only go where we're invited. We can only make the suggestions if the people don't want to invite us in. Like today, we're invited in here. If we hadn't been invited in here, I wouldn't be here in Highland Falls today. But if there's an invitation, sure, we always take avail of that. And dealing with kids is important, but I got to tell you, a lot of these people who are buying the drugs, you'd like to quantify them as kids and teenagers? At my age, they're younger. People using drugs now, many of them are 55 plus. 55 plus. Because of the opioid addiction. You know, they get back pain, they have all kinds of trauma, suddenly they're hooked on it, they can't get prescriptions anymore because the state has cracked down on the doctors. So they look for the alternative. Next thing you know, you got a 55-year-old guy, he's inhaling heroin, or he's injecting heroin. So how the hell did he go from taking oxycodone, hillbilly heroin, or Percocet, or Vicodin, to shooting up heroin.